Chelsea beat Wolves 6-2 over the weekend, but why did we do so well, and how did Enzo Maresca get the most out of his team? Lads, lasses, and the rest of the masses, welcome back to another tactical breakdown. Before we get into this episode, I just want to give a special shout out to KP7 Jim, who's recently become a member of the channel and chosen the more expensive True Blue option and has earned this shout out. I appreciate your support, so thank you so much. Make sure you go down and show them some love in the comments. If you'd like to become a member yourself and get access to a whole bunch of exclusive perks, make sure you hit the join button down below. It's only 99 pence a month and goes towards helping me create these types of videos. Anyway, let's get into the actual meat of this. Let's talk about how our team set up firstly, because it was a little bit different than what we've kind of been seeing, and we've seen a few looks in this new 3-3-4 type system that Enzo Maresca has been employing. Obviously, I've got all the Wolves players here. I will move them out of the way, but we know that Gusto is obviously going to be the player that inverts. We know that he's going to invert in some regard, whether that's him playing next to Caicedo in the sixes or as a right centre mid. In this specific game, he kind of did a bit of hybrid here, and likewise with Enzo, and we'll talk about Enzo a little bit more a little later. But for the most part, we did see this 3-2-2-3 or this 3-2-5 that we kind of have seen in the past, with Gusto and Caicedo acting next to each other as two sixes, Enzo playing a bit higher and Palmer playing a bit higher. But the difference is because we always talk about whether this is either the box midfield that we're seeing here or the diamond with one of the players pushing on. Obviously, we've seen in recent times Enzo play in that advanced 10 role, which doesn't really suit him that much. Palmer obviously can play there very, very comfortably. He's very good at pressing from the front, and I think he's the ideal candidate for this role. And that's kind of what we saw. We kind of saw a half and half between the box midfield and the diamond, because Palmer was tasked more with being the one to get forward, get into these central areas, be more aggressive and press, whereas Enzo, even though he was doing that at times and getting high, he was tasked with kind of dropping deep and helping us build up from the back as at times too. And we kind of see this fluidity in the midfield here, where when Palmer does go forward, Enzo would kind of drop deep and be able to supplement the midfield. But then again, we also saw situations where they would both play in these 10 roles and push quite high. Now, I want to talk about Enzo specifically because there's been a lot of talk about his position recently. Obviously, we saw him play solo in the 10 role and having to cover all the space and running around. And I don't think that's the best position for him. Obviously, we know how good he is at playing as a deep line playmaker or playing as a pure 8, and I think that is where his best position is, as a pure 8 on this left-hand side or on the right-hand side, but mainly on this left-hand side where he can kind of get his head up and play the ball inwards. I think that's kind of where his best position is. And we saw him play that way in this game, and we also saw him play, as I said, a bit of a mixture of the two, because he played as an 8 for when we were building out from the back, but he also would push on and try and play as a 10 at times too. Now, I think this works specifically in this one scenario when we have the two players playing in the 10s, because if he's playing on his own in this 10 role, where we have, like, for example, I'm just going to move the players around just to show the diamond. In the diamond, if you have him playing as this sole 10, he can't really cover ground quick enough to be able to put the pressure where it needs to be, and obviously he's not great at those kind of number 10 positioning passes, really. He's much better at playing passes from deeper positions, and obviously we actually see Gusto and Caicedo playing as this kind of 2. And obviously Gusto would get off the pitch sometimes and leave Caicedo as on his own here, but for the most part we would see this as the kind of main setup. And obviously when he's with Palmer, he doesn't have to cover as much space, because Palmer can cover that space, and obviously Palmer is much better at pressing from the front and covering the space and kind of drifting all over the place. And because he is so good on either side, doesn't matter whether he's on the right wing and he can play balls inward on his left foot, or if he's on the left side and he can play balls into the channels from these positions. Palmer can cover all that space and do that. Now, what's interesting about this specific position for Enzo is how he kind of helped us in the build-up, and it was very interesting the way that he plays in this position. Obviously, he plays this way in the left 8 role, but he was also playing it from this more advanced role. So what he would do when we were on the ball, say we had it with I've actually put Jurgensen here, it was Sanchez. Did need to correct that. There we go, that's much better. When we did have the ball back with our centre-backs or the goalkeeper, Enzo would do this very interesting thing where, specifically, if he knew that the ball was going out to this left hand side and not going the opposite way, and the kind of team would shift over, as the Wolves players kind of move over to this way, Enzo would go really, really wide to the touchline and play almost as this left winger at times, on really, really close to the side. And what that would do is, not only does that provide a passing option when we get the ball to Cucurella, who can play it around the corner to him, or play it to Caicedo, who can then play it out wide to him, but what it mainly did was it dragged whoever was this right-sided six out towards him to mark him, because he's made such a big movement from the central position that obviously he'll be on space on his own, and he doesn't want to be left on his own. No one else is going to pick him up, so this six would have to go with him. And what this does is it vacates this massive hole here, which allowed obviously Palmer to kind of come across and play in the central role, as we kind of spoke about. He could play there and cover the ground. But what it also allowed us to do is not only do that, but if he was occupied with Palmer here, it allowed Jackson to drop deep into these spaces, and he was receiving the ball through the lines quite a lot of the time, specifically from Caicedo, who was getting a lot through Caicedo here. That's just two options. We also saw Mudryk as well kind of come into this position as well at times, and kind of do what he loves to do and kind of come inside and try and play into a central position and go forward from there. So just basically Enzo's positioning allowed us to create the space in the center where we wouldn't really normally have the space, because obviously in this 4-2-3-1 that they played, or almost like a 4-3-3 with two deeper midfielders, the midfield is so congested with the two holding midfielders here, and obviously Wolves were very, very energetic in this game. They were always going to press us on the ball and not give us very much time, so we needed to find those little pockets and kind of be able to play through that. And it wasn't just Enzo doing this that kind of allowed us to play out. Obviously, we spoke about in the preview about how we would have to play around their kind of congested midfield and their kind of stocky central positioned players, and try and go around the outside, and that's why I thought that Madueke would have such a good game, and inevitably he did. What we kind of did was very interesting from build-up perspective, because when the ball was out with Sanchez or with Colwill, what we'd do and what we'd see is Fofana and Cucurella go really, really wide. Like, they would not stay close at all. They would actually make these gaps quite big, which is quite worrying in the fact that obviously there's not very much support for Sanchez if he does get pressured. But what it allowed us to do, obviously either of these two, Gusto and Caicedo, could kind of drop into this position to kind of provide that option. But what he kept doing, and what we kept doing quite well, is we would pass the ball around onto one side, say get this out with Cucurella out on this wide area here, and when the players kind of commit over to this side to try and close him down, the ball would get played very quickly to Caicedo or Enzo, who would drop deep, and then we try and get it across the other side as quickly as possible. And mainly we actually saw this from Sanchez or Colwill, and Colwill was very, very vital in this game, as I spoke about in my Feeling Blue live stream after the game. His passing and his penetrative passing and his progressive passing is what kind of helped us in this game. And what we kept seeing is this kind of movement where we get the ball out here, the players would commit to one side, and we'd pop it quickly to Colwill, and then try and get it out to Fofana, who would then try and drive up the pitch with the ball. Or if he couldn't do that, he would obviously offload it to Gusto, who could get up higher, or play it to Madueke, who would always get higher. Obviously, Palmer can drop into this role and kind of receive the ball, and that's a lot of the time that's kind of what we saw. And it was just a matter of, we were trying in the first half to let Wolves commit onto us and then play through it. Obviously, it didn't really work, because Wolves, to their credit, in the first half were very, very good, and they were very, very sharp. And they pressed us much better than we kind of could deal with, and especially in the midfield areas, they kind of really dominated us in midfield. When he had Caicedo and Gusto trying to get on the ball, they were not given very many touches on the ball. We'd get one, maybe two touches before a player was onto their back, and we also saw Caicedo specifically struggle quite a lot at being able to play it. And again, I spoke about this in the Feeling Blue after the game, but basically the way that we kind of play in Maresca's new style is, what I like to say is, we have to kind of play one step back to go two steps forward. And a lot of the time what that includes is playing it into Caicedo so he can knock it back into a centre-back, and then from the centre-back play it through the lines. And obviously when a team like Wolves are going to press you really, really high, this is available to you because the space is vacated, right? Because they've pushed out from these central positions to try and press. But obviously, if he's not quick enough at doing this, or he's too sloppy on the ball, they will just get the ball back and spring counters, and that's kind of what we saw in the first half. They really, really stepped on the gas against us and didn't give either him or Gusto much time to do this. And just in general, I think we were a bit lethargic. We weren't really switched on, and we kind of just were taking too many touches. We've obviously seen from training footage and things that I've reacted to in the past on the channel how Enzo Maresca is very much a coach that demands 1-2 touch passing. He's been very adamant that saying 3 touches is too many. Like, if you're taking more than 2 touches, it's too many, and we can't play that way. And obviously the players understand this, but sometimes it's just one of those things where when the game is so fast, and obviously this was quite a rowdy game, the not only was it in a hostile atmosphere over in Wolverhampton, especially considering the comments that Madueke made in the lead up to the game, and the celebration that Jackson did after he scored his first goal, kind of really riled up the crowd. And we were always going to have that energy, and Wolves were always going to be spurred on by that 12th man effect, and they really were, and they kind of stepped onto us and didn't really give us the time to take those extra touches that in the first half we kind of needed. Now, I'll talk about the second half in more detail in a bit, but let's quickly go over the goals that happened in the first half. Obviously, I'm going to speak about all of the goals from this game. We had 4 in the first half and 4 in the second half. Very distributed very differently, but regardless. The first one, I just want to give massive credit to Bernardo Cueva, because even though the ball isn't assisted by a Chelsea player, we've seen the same set piece done so many times, and we see something interesting happen here. We obviously see the 2 players on the corner to kind of give the opposition something to think about, but the thing which we kind of keep seeing, we saw it a lot in pre-season, and it worked a few times in pre-season, is that near post flick to the back post. We don't ever really seem to want to score or try to score directly from corners. It's more so we put it into an area and then we can kind of flick it onto the back post and have someone there to put it in. And obviously Jackson was the beneficiary of that, and even though our Chelsea player doesn't get the flick on, one of their players does, and it falls to Jackson, who's completely free in the centre, and he can easily tap it in. And it's one of those goals where it's so early in the game, it's lovely to have that kind of buffer. And obviously, unfortunately, it did kind of spur Wolves on to play a bit better in this game, because they really started to kind of grow into it as the half went on, and as obviously again Jackson's celebration kind of riled the crowd up, and that all in turn boosted the Wolves players. And let's kind of talk about Cunha's goal. Cunha's first goal, the goal that equalised it and made it 1-1. Now, this is another situation where Caicedo gets caught on the ball because Wolves' press was really high. Obviously, there's questions over the start of this goal, because it is a possible foul from Bellegarde. Personally, I think it could be a foul, but I wouldn't be like annoyed if it wasn't given. I think that Caicedo just really needs to shift the ball quicker, and he didn't. The ref lets the game flow, and as he kind of did for the whole game, which again was something I spoke about in Feeling Blue, and Gusto just simply doesn't get back into his position. We can see it here that Gusto, for the most part, he's tasked with playing in the central role, but obviously when the ball goes into a position where we need to defend, he will usually fill in at his right back role and kind of occupy that space in the wide right area. And in this instance, for some reason, he just didn't get back. I don't know if it's because he thought someone else was covering the man that was there or not. I'm not really sure. But he doesn't get into his position, and then it's just a minor individual error and a really good finish from the Brazilian after a quite exquisite pass from Ait Nouri. Let's talk about the next goal, and that is Chelsea's second goal. And again, a little bit of controversial situation that happens in this one, because the ball is technically moving from Sanchez's goal kick that he takes, but let's take nothing away from the actual goal. And I don't think, let's be real, I don't think the slight movement on the ball really affects how this goal would have happened. I think the ball was pretty much at a stop by the time Sanchez kicks this. It's a absolutely delicious long pass all the way up to Jackson, who holds the ball up really, really well and is able to flick it over to Palmer, who, as I spoke about in the review, he did the exact same thing against Everton, but this time it's on his left foot and he lofts it over the goalkeeper Jose Sarr to score. And it's a really cold finish from Palmer. And again, you just kind of have to put your hands up and just say, this is individual brilliance. We can't really demote this to any tactical thing. But the one thing I do want to speak about it in terms of tactics is the fact that we kind of saw us quickly restart. And I spoke about this in my preview, and I'll speak about it later because it happens again for one of our other goals. But I spoke about it in the preview that Wolves in the Arsenal game really did not switch on quick enough when it came to quick throw-ins, quick free kicks, and things like that. And this was another case of that where the Wolves players simply just did not get back into their positions when the goal kick was given. And Sanchez quickly takes the goal kick. They're caught cold. They're caught napping. Jackson gets the ball, and then obviously Palmer finishes. And it's a good sign as well because obviously we know that Maresca has kind of set us up to be this short passing team. It's good to see that we can go route one and still get success that way. And I think it's a very good indicator that Enzo Maresca is not as one-dimensional as most people expected him to be, and admittedly myself, I kind of expected him to be a bit more one-dimensional than he's already shown. Obviously, we've seen different setups in the midfield already, but this is also another different setup in terms of how we're attacking, which is good to see. But then, obviously, they get their equalising goal to make it 2-2, and this one comes from Strand Larsen. This one, again, it's not really a tactical thing. It's just a silly foul from Madueke in the first place that gives them this free kick. And I think that's the only thing that he really did wrong in this game, let's be real. But after that, we just need to reorganise, and we just don't. Ait Nuri plays the ball into Totti, and he's just not marked at all. I'm not really sure what's gone wrong there. I think it's mainly because we were kind of marking space and not men. And he's just one of the players that didn't get picked up in that scenario. He obviously heads the ball back over to Larsen, and he's never going to miss this. We've already seen from him in the 2 games that we've seen him play that he is a very comfortable target man, and he's never going to miss this, and it's a very good finish from him in truth as well. And it's just Fofana. I think the blame can kind of fall on Fofana here. He gets himself into a bit of a pickle, and he doesn't really deal with it. Again, it's one of those things where as we get more time with our set-piece coach, Bernardo Cueva, I think that these types of mistakes are going to be ironed out, but it is just simply a matter of no one marking Totti, and then they get a good goal from it. It's a very well-worked set-piece. Now, let's quickly talk about the second half, because there were some tactical changes in this second half that came from both sets of players, and it kind of impacted on how we found this second half so easy to deal with and how we scored so many goals. I think the first thing of note to kind of take in, obviously Mudryk goes off for Pedro Neto. Well, I don't think that really changed the tactics that much, but I don't think that, obviously looking back at this game for the research for this episode, I don't think that Mudryk had a particularly bad game. I think he was actually pretty good from what he kind of was able to do. He didn't really get the ball much. Pedro Neto was kind of the same when he came on. He didn't really get the ball much. We just kind of naturally play it to the right side more. So that didn't really affect anything in terms of tactics. But the one thing I do think we kind of immediately saw in this second half was how much more intense our press was. And the thing which we kept seeing, the pattern we kept seeing, was this really high press from all of our players, Enzo included. We'd get all 5 players pressing up high, and it would force Jose Sa in goal to go long. And this is kind of what we've seen from Enzo Maresca's Leicester City team, that they force their opponents to go long quite a lot of the time. And what this just does is that if the long pass isn't good enough, or their players can't hold the ball up, it just gives the ball straight back to us and we recycle the ball. Now, we kept seeing this situation happen where the ball would go long, and Colwill, who is really good in the air, I think one of the things that kind of goes understated is Colwill's ability in the air, because he is so used to being praised for his passing and those types of things, and obviously his defending, but his aerial ability is one of his best assets, and up against him, their players just really did not find much success, and he kept winning the ball back and getting it back to us, and obviously we kept putting on the pressure back onto Wolves once we got the ball, and we were kind of retaining possession. The other thing which is of note that we kind of did in this half was basically we did the complete opposite of what we did in the first half, is that our passing in this second half was so much quicker, and it was very obvious that Enzo Maresca had gone in at half-time and had said to the players, especially Caicedo, especially Gusto, do not take more than 1 or 2 touches. That was very simple, very simple thing. I said, you need to pass the ball as soon as you get it. And we saw this happen a lot because obviously Wolves had been pressing really hard for 45 minutes in that first half, and they didn't really do it as much in the second half. They kind of dropped off a little bit, and their press was still quite high, but it wasn't as intense, and it gave us that kind of split second extra to kind of be able to play those 1-2 touch passes, and Caicedo found this much easier, and he was so much better in the second half. Honestly, one of our better players in the game. in this second half. And obviously we kept seeing these combinations happen. Obviously we kind of spoke about Enzo coming out into these wide areas, and when the ball did go into Caicedo from Colwill, for example, the ball would then go to Enzo and we could progress up the pitch with the bodies kind of committed forward, and they'd have this gap in behind to kind of move into. And not only that, but just in general, the hesitation that we were kind of having in the first half wasn't there anymore. We kind of felt like we were delaying on the ball too much, and as I said, taking too many touches, but also just the idea of it didn't feel like our midfielders, Gusto and Caicedo that is, had much confidence in the fact that they were going to be able to find a man with their pass because of how well Wolves were pressing. And what we kind of saw in this half, especially is what kind of I didn't expect us to really do this, but we kind of obviously Gusto was playing in this kind of right hand sided role for the most part in the first half and trying to get high. In this second half, he was playing a bit closer to Caicedo. They were playing almost like a pair and like a two here, so they could bounce the ball off each other much quicker. And it was always that option, right? Because we kind of saw it a lot of the time in the first half that Caicedo especially would get really, really isolated and he wouldn't be able to play this pass to Gusto. And it was kind of him constantly getting crowded out by the Wolves players. But in this half, with Gusto a bit closer, he kind of could quickly pass the ball across, and obviously with the player running this way, the momentum shift, then we get to Gusto and we can move past the press and kind of move up. And again, I spoke about this a little bit in the first half, but we saw it more so in the second half, was that back and forth passing that I've kind of spoken about, the going backwards to go forwards. And we saw this a lot. We always see it with Colwill trying to play incisive balls through the centre to Jackson or to Enzo or to Palmer. But we really saw it in this game where we would play balls into Caicedo, he'd play it out to Cucurella, the ball would go from Cucurella up to Enzo, who would move into this position, he'd get the ball and turn and then play it to Neto, who's making a run or something like that. And we see this kind of zigzaggy pattern go, and obviously Enzo, when he gets the ball, could also play it back to Caicedo, and then Caicedo could play it up to Jackson. We saw that combination quite a lot. And then obviously when Jackson gets it, he can play it to Palmer and it's going backwards, and then Palmer plays it forward. You see this constant movement of going forward and then going backwards and then going forward and then going backwards, and that's kind of how we kept playing. And with that movement, it's not only just a good way of being able to play the ball and keep the ball, but it also just means that the Wolves players can't keep up with it. It's moving so quickly and so back and forth that the players are just running back and forth and not able to kind of cover enough space in enough time to be able to kind of get the ball back. And obviously I've spoken about this again multiple times in the past, but the reason why I really like Enzo Maresca's ball and in general passing football and possession-based football is that it's the first thing that you are taught when you are playing football as a child, is that passing the ball is much quicker than running with it. So it's one of the things is that if you're being able to pass the ball and doing it quickly and doing this back and forth movement, their players will never be able to run as fast as the ball is moving. They will never be able to catch up. And obviously with Wolves making their kind of half-hearted press into these areas and kind of trying to put pressure on us, we were just passing it around them really, really easily. And it just made us be able to have so much more space in the attacking areas, and obviously we saw a lot more space kind of vacated into the wide areas specifically because of a specific tactic that Wolves did, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. With that kind of lack of a press that Wolves were doing, what it kind of also allowed us to do a bit better than we weren't really able to do is just get our centre-backs on the ball and get them comfortable on the ball, because they were putting so much pressure on us before and like pushing really, really high here to kind of stop us from being able to play the ball comfortably with our centre-backs. When they kind of sat off a little bit more, it just gave us that extra half second for Colwill, for example, again, to kind of get his head up and be able to play an incisive pass, which he didn't really have in the first half. And I felt like Wolves kind of, I don't know if this was particularly them trying to hold what they had and then try and hit us on the counter, because we were going into the second half level. I don't know if that was kind of a tactical idea that they thought they would have much more success just playing on the break, and they did have quite a lot of success in the first half playing on the break, so maybe that's what they kind of decided to do. But what it ended up doing is quite backfiring quite badly, because it allowed Colwill especially, and we kind of already spoke about Colwill, it allowed him to just have time on the ball, which he otherwise didn't have. And when you give a player that is creative like Colwill that much time, he's going to find passes that unlock your defence. That's just simply how it works. And again, we kind of always saw him playing those balls into these areas. And what he would do is it would bypass this front four completely, just in one pass. And from there, we obviously get this 5v6 here, which we can kind of go up the pitch and try and create chances with the extra men kind of committed forward now. That's not to say that Wolves didn't have their moments in the second half, though, because they did. They definitely had a lot of attacking potential. Again, most of them on the break. They were very, very good on the break. And the one thing I do want to kind of speak about is a slight adjustment that we saw, and something that we actually saw Enzo Maresca compliment Madueke for especially, is that we saw in the defensive phase when they were attacking us that our wingers, Pedro Neto and Madueke, were getting back to help out defensively. We also saw like this, and it's one of the things which I commended Madueke for, especially in the game, was like he had already scored like all of his goals and whatever, and it was the 92nd minute and he was still tracking back to try and win the ball back, and that's something we really want to see from your wingers. And obviously it's just one of the things that we haven't really seen from our wingers in a long time, because we've had players that have been a bit lazy, like Sterling. For example, Mudryk is a bit like it. He was a bit better in this game, admittedly, but Mudryk is another culprit who kind of doesn't like to track back. But Madueke and Pedro Neto were basically, at times, playing us left and right mids or left and right wing backs. They were trying to get back and help their defenders, which is especially important on this right-hand side, as we've kind of spoken about, because obviously Gusto has to make this long trek from this midfield area back into his right-back area, and if he's not able to do that in time, this space is just vacated for the winger to go into. And obviously Madueke was trying to be that man that could kind of delay this movement into this space before he got back, and obviously once Gusto was back, he could kind of just act as the double up man instead. Now let's talk about the main tactical switch that happened in this game, which kind of was Wolves' undoing. And it's not just the fact that we were passing the ball back, it's not the fact that we were being able to get it out to our wide players quicker. What it was actually one of the changes that Wolves made themselves. Now we saw that Aït-Nouri was actually kind of inverting into the midfield, and we'd see one of their kind of holding players move a bit higher to kind of match up with our two deeper midfielders, and again trying to put more pressure on us. And Aït-Nouri coming into this space would obviously make them play in this kind of three, and they kind of try to match up against us. And obviously, I think the idea behind this was to, again, try and add an extra body in the central areas, because we were finding it quite easy to play through their central areas at times. And I think that they wanted to just get a bit more control here. And obviously, Aït-Nouri was not having a very good time up against Madueke anyway. And I think this was kind of a way of protecting him specifically and being like, right, we'll give someone else a chance to play there. And I think it was Totti that was eventually tasked to actually play here. And it was kind of like, hey, Totti's a bit more physical. He can kind of give Madueke a bit of a better match when he kind of went up against him, and that would kind of help them be able to combat Madueke, who was finding quite a lot of success on this right side. But again, as I said, this backfired massively, because what it actually did instead was just make them less wide, and they were this really narrow back three. And obviously maybe this was a tactical switch, maybe it was also due to injury. Obviously we saw in the first half that Doherty was struggling quite a lot on this right hand side, and eventually he was replaced by Dawson, who would go into this back three and make it them actually playing with three centre backs here. But what it just did is it made them really narrow, and it made Madueke just have all of this space out here, especially when he goes really, really wide, and obviously Palmer could play here. And they never, ever really got to grips with him, and they never were able to get players back into these positions to deal with him on this right side, like we kind of see Gusto doing, obviously. As I spoke about, like Gusto's issue from this inverted position is that he has to get back into right back. We saw the same thing with Ryan Aït-Nouri here, where he had to get back into this left back position, and for the most part when we were playing through the lines, he just never got the chance to do that. He was kind of stuck floating in this midfield area, and then Totti wasn't able to keep up with Madueke in terms of being able to actually defend him, because he's so good at 1v1 wing play. And it ends up with Madueke scoring the fifth goal in this game and our third. So this goal starts again with Wolves just switching off at the restart, which is something I spoke about in my preview and was also a factor for Palmer's goal. With that vacated space that Aït-Nouri is kind of left and up against one-on-one against Totti, and Madueke finds it really easy to just drive into the space, blast it through on his left foot, and it goes through the legs of a player, gets a deflection, and gives Jose Sarr absolutely no chance to save it. Again, that was just a simple situation where they didn't have the players out wide to deal with Madueke, and they just switched off at the restart and just didn't get players back quick enough. Let's talk about Madueke's second goal, because again, this is one of those situations where we force Wolves to go long, and it's a really difficult job to win aerials against Levi Colwill. He wins the ball and it drops to Enzo. There's a bit of head tennis and he plays it to Caicedo. He in turn then gets it to Palmer over the top through the lines. Ait Nouri is committed high up the pitch centrally because, again, he's inverted and he's trying to match up with us. And he slots in Madueke into that space, who smashes it through the keeper's leg for his second. Again, another situation where Ait Nouri is just completely not there, vacating that space of Madueke and allowing him to just do whatever he wanted. But it wouldn't end there because Madueke would get his third goal and his hat-trick in this game. And it's another goal that is just a result of that inversion into midfield from Ait Nouri. Chelsea, once again, high press. Enzo Fernandez wins the ball high up. It falls to Jackson, who shields the ball really, really well and taps it on for Palmer. He lays it on a plate for Madueke into that exact same space once again. He finishes almost exactly the same way, blasting it in on his right foot and scoring his hat-trick. Now let's talk about the last goal, and this is the one for Joao Felix, who came off the bench. Now this is just excellent passing play, and there's not really much Wolves could have done about it, really. I spoke about it before. When the ball moves so quickly, it just gives the defenders no chance. It's so hard to react to passing of this quality and speed. It's a perfect example of, again, that thing which I spoke about where we had to kind of go backwards to go forwards. This all starts from the goalkeeper. Sanchez plays it beautifully to Cucurella out wide. He knocks it up to Pedro Neto, who had come on at half-time, obviously. And the Portuguese manages to scramble it away from two Wolves masterfully, as they are calling it now. And it was a great way to finish off this performance, with the Wolves fans swiftly leaving the stadium about 10 minutes away from the end of the game. More of that just one-touch, confident passing football that we know Enzo Maresca is trying to get us to play, and it's clearly able to work. Not only to create chances, but to score goals too. We move on to Servette in the second leg of our Europa Conference League playoffs, where I'd imagine we'll try to bring some of these attacking ideas to as well, albeit with a heavily rotated side. But if you can't wait until then, YouTube reckons you'll enjoy one of these two videos on screen in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues!